Assassin's Creed is one of those projects that doesn't come along very often. Millions and millions and millions of people played this game, and I thought, well, there's got to be some great hook here that could be made into a movie.
From the get-go, when we first thought of the license, we had in mind at some point coming to the silver screen. So the way the franchise was built was meant to be easily transported to the cinema.
It was a big challenge because adaptation of video games into movie was not always a success. And the choices we have made as far as Michael Fassbender, as far as Marion Cotillard, of course, just encouraged all the director. Even if they didn't know the game at the beginning, they embraced the universe.
I wouldn't be doing the job if it wasn't for Michael. I mean, just come off the experience of Macbeth. Working with him as an actor, and I think both Michael and I just felt really keen to work together again. Michael said, have you heard about Assassin's Creed? And, you know, I've been involved in developing it for the last 3 years, and would you be interested in it? And I kind of thought, wow, to be able to do a film of this sort of scale and size about this sort of subject matter with an actor like Michael, who's also a producer in it, I just sort of didn't quite understand why I wouldn't. Michael started talking to me about the concept and the idea of people being sort of defined by the legacy of those that have come before them, and how we're kind of made up of the experiences of our ancestors. And I found that really interesting and thought it was quite a unique kind of cinematic idea.
You're living proof of the link between heredity and crime.
How did you find me?
We found Aguilar,
Who's Aguilar?
your ancestor.
And then it was only sort of after being seduced by that concept that I was kind of opened up to the world by Ubisoft, being taken through each of the games, being introduced to the people that originated the idea in the game, and also John Julian from Ubisoft. It was really their energy, you know, and his passion in it too that also got me excited by it.
You're about to enter the Animus. Commence regression.
It was very important for us to find something original outside of the games in terms of the characters in our story piece and our regression, and really respecting the rules of the Animus and using that to its full potential.
The Animus in the game is a kind of chair that transports you back into the particular time. So it's kind of like, well, is that going to be cinematic and interesting enough to put on screen? And that's when we started playing around with the idea of virtual reality and maybe being influenced by virtual reality for the experience of the Animus.
We developed our own version of the Animus, which allows it to be more of an interactive experience for the person that is regressing, as opposed to just sort of lying in a chair.
He's synchronizing.
I was really intrigued also, how does Cal learn? And it's sort of aided in a way to be able to pull off all these sort of physical feats that his ancestors were able to do.
The idea for Cal was this concept of somebody who felt like that they didn't belong to anything. From the age of 8 onwards, he's familyless. And so the idea that we would have somebody who realizes that they have a very strong family, and a family that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years through this sort of lineage to the creed. And he would sort of become almost sort of reborn and realize that he does belong to something much greater than himself. Aguilar will teach Cal the ways of the creed, both in his experience in the regression and also what's happening to Cal and the bleeding effect.
We really did focus on that idea of DNA and memory, and are you defined by the world that you kind of grow up in, whether violence is carried through you, through your ancestors, and whether that's something that is expressed through yourself and whether you can kind of control that.
The threat remains while free will exists. Isn't it time we gave science a try?
I love the idea that Templars were the sort of forefathers of science, and that their sort of whole concept and belief system is that the evolution of man is based on science, and to serve science, we serve the evolution of man.
You turn to violence. I turn to science.
So we wanted to have Marianne's character, Sophie, very much steeped in that world. She's an absolute scientist, and she believes that science will lead us forward and draw us out of a lot of things that have remained since the beginning of time, which is primarily the aggressive nature of man.
Violence is a disease, like cancer. And like cancer, we hope to control it one day.
Sofia Ryken really wants to find this cure because she wants to improve the human race. Some of the Templars have a different goal, which is empowerment and control. You interfered. Again.
When it first started, she wasn't called Sophie, I think she was called John. I think, you know, it was a male character. And then we started to develop this relationship between Sophie and Rickon, and Sophie being the face of the Templars, and she believes that, you know, humanity can, you know, evolve into something, you know, incredibly brilliant and sophisticated.
He has to go back in the Animus.
He needs more time before he goes in
We
again.
don't have time. Rykin is the CEO of Abstergo Industries. What he's trying to get permission to do is to add a component into the pharmaceutical drugs to remove the violent gene in people. His Templar desire is to rid the world of the assassins.
If we eradicate free will, we eradicate the assassins. A cancer that has menaced society for centuries.
It's not my best work. Of course, for a Templar, assassins are a lesser breed that should be exterminated if we were to live a more comfortable and civilized life. Your recent work has confirmed our belief that mankind cannot be redeemed.
It's not sort of black and white and evil and good. It's really about two opposing ideologies. You know, the Assassin's Creed, the tenets are all about the ability for human beings to make choices for themselves, that their instincts will guide them. And Templars believe that there is a sophisticated group that need to lead, that need to provide direction, and so they believe in control.
Assassins and Templars have been at war for centuries. I aim to change that.
We basically took something that is a very interesting universe and something that has been experienced in a gaming form, assassins and Templars battling since, you know, the dawn of time, and created a cinematic experience, and hopefully it'll bring a new perspective to the gamers that are already playing.
When I saw it, it felt real.
It was.
What is this?
You're about to enter the Animus. What you're about to see, hear, and feel are the memories of someone who's been dead for 500 years.
What do you want from me?
Your past.
The concept of assassins and Templars battling through the centuries just seemed like something that would lend itself very nicely to a cinematic experience.
The party's just getting started.
Michael's one of those rare actors who is able to have the most extraordinary emotional range, but is also physically incredibly capable. He's playing two characters. He's getting hurt and pummeled every day. You know, there's very few actors that can kind of do that. Can get on a horse and ride at extreme speeds, can jump off a building, brilliant at fighting with a sword. He's quite amazing in that sense. We had an incredible fight choreographer, Thomas and Ben, that were both working with Michael directly.
He's involved heavily in the action. We have a lot of rehearsal time with him to really try and hit the notes.
There was a lot of training every morning, just sort of conditioning, strengthening, and then working with stunts. There's all sorts of techniques in there, moments of jiu-jitsu. You want there to be an element of messiness, nastiness there.
I like the fact that you can just feel there's effort to it. People are exhausted by it. You can see the strain. So that's something I didn't want to shy away from. I didn't want it to always be perfect.
So, you know, everybody involved wanted to have that feel. So you can almost sort of taste the sweat and the blood, you know, the sort of real effort that went into the physical pieces of the film. Ariane Labad, who's fantastic. She plays Maria. That is the great thing with working with somebody going through that experience. The weather was intense, the material was intense. So yeah, we became very close, you know, very quickly. We had that shorthand. We understood each other and we could just sort of get on with getting the work done.
She's got a kick that could stop a steam train.
Yeah, I never imagined I would be doing stuff like that in my life ever. And it's very exciting, all this stand and all this kind of energy that I have to find. It's very intense, but yeah, it's a pure joy.
We wanted to bring something fresh and new in terms of introducing new characters.
It's a group of assassins working together, so you see the brotherhood, you know, it's exciting, you know, and they all have their own flavor as well.
They call me Musa, but my name is Baptiste. And I'm completely out of my comfort zone with Musa. It's a huge stretch coming from a very dark and dramatic world. Justin, he just said, yo, I expect you to come to the set with a nice bag of tricks. He just, no pressure.
With Lynn, Justin basically told me he wanted her to be pretty much who I am, quiet, focused, serious. You know that she's capable of something, but she's not showing it just yet.
My character went in with that idea of like being able to just knock someone straight away, just knock them down. So that's the power of him.
This is my first film. I'm actually a martial artist, so having that in my background helped with this character. I focused my training on sword and kicking, as well as a new weapon that I picked up is a rope dart. The most difficult part is aiming and not hitting yourself.
I've never done stunts before and I was very nervous, but it's like a dance. Just every day coming in, going over, going over, going over. We're gonna add this, we're gonna do that, we're gonna teach you how to kick, we're gonna teach you how to punch, we're gonna teach you how to roll.
I needed a lot of help with this, a lot of homework involved. I've done a ton of training. Everything needs to look precise and methodic. It's when those moments when I'm out of my comfort zone when Justin is like, yes, yes. That's where the magic happens.
In the finale sequence, they break into the Animus, and then it's this whole journey of everybody fighting.
So Musa starts the fight, and I join in. At the same time, there's smoke bombs going off.
Justin loves smoke. One take we were running, Michelle took off like a bat out of hell, and I was like, yo, it was smoke over here in aisle 3. You wanna take it easy on me?
And then I come in and I'm very aggressive. I got to kick someone through a window. I got to flip around and slice people, and it's nuts.
In the finale, they get their old ancient weapons, and each assassin individually comes alive. It's a big mishmash of everybody.
You got this team, you got to depend on each other. And so they got your back, they're watching you, you have to watch them, and we got through it, man. Assassin's Creed. This whole journey has been magical for me.
It's just been quite an experience getting used to using my body in that way. I feel a lot harder.
I feel real strong right now.
Those guys really worked relentlessly hard. And so we got a mix of something pretty original, I think.
I was just very lucky with all the cast. They all just sort of clicked together, and I'm just extremely lucky that they said yes and wanted to be part of it. I knew that the imagery of Assassin's Creed, the game, you can't ignore, and I think it's so cinematic. So we're always being influenced by the look of the game with the story. The big question was, what is humanly achievable that you can build, create, express for real that is done digitally within a game?
When you look at those characters throughout the games, from a costume point of view, we've made our version of them as close to what Ubisoft would like and made them as real as possible, basically. The ones in the game, they're beautifully designed. They use the period that they're set in very well. It's very kind of clear point of reference. So we wanted to make distinct differences in the groups using colour and texture and shape. So you knew this is the Templar world, and you know this is the Assassin world, and you know this is Abstergo.
And they're beautiful. They feel character driven, and they feel real, and they feel historical. They don't feel appropriation. So that was important. I think with all the period costumes, it was about really getting that detail kind of right so that you believed in it.
Coming up with an Aguilar that you believe is the right manifestation for Assassin's Creed fans is difficult to do. And essentially what you do is you just make the most incredible costume that you can make.
That was our first costume, and we wanted Aguilar to feel not just Spanish. He needed to feel like he was very nomadic, travelled a lot, was worldly wise.
I kind of wanted to feel as though they came from an environment. You could tell where they were sort of made. I wanted costumes that were, you know, had real interesting Middle Eastern materials, had real beading, charms and stuff. You just could feel the assassins were picking things up and were like kind of gypsies and collecting things and were kind of travellers.
Por el Credo.
The reason the decoration is there is from a historical ancestral root, and not just to make it decorative. It needs to mean something. So all the amulets they've got and all the workings is all worked out to have significance for that character.
Where'd you get this?
It's your mother's necklace. I wanted you to have it.
At the end, it is a film about a game, and so there are things in the game that if you made them in reality, they wouldn't actually work on a body. So those kind of things you have to bear in mind when you're doing an action film.
Everyone set, and action.
A lot of those costumes in the game wouldn't have translated that well to a living person running around in it, because a lot of the times what can look good can just be very uncomfortable. And although it was hot, it was very important for us to have clothing that doesn't restrict what we're doing in terms of parkour and physical movement wise. The boots were actually runners inside a boot, so it was very comfortable because we were running a lot and jumping. So yeah, she did a great job in making the costumes look really good but also be very practical.
Okay, reset guys, reset, very good, here we go.
That was one starting point, and then the other one was getting a silhouette that worked for Michael, that gives a dynamic of movement and looks strong. We did 20 or 30 versions of hoods to try and work out what's the best shape that would work filmically. Because in the game it can be very manipulated, but in reality, someone wearing it moves, it doesn't stay in place, it can fall off in action.
It's a way of obscuring the fact that there's something that's really powerful and dangerous that's hidden underneath it. And we had to make sure that the hood sort of landed right over the top part of your eyes to be able to get exactly that look. But then you also had to make sure that the hood didn't blow back and show who it was when they were doing some kind of a stunt. And it's so good and it's so well crafted that then you have real respect for the people who are inside it.
For an actor, when you put on the costume, it is that extra 10% of your performance where you really feel like the character who wears the clothes.
You did well, Cal.
There needed to be a big distinction between the 15th century and the modern world. So Justin's kind of ideas were that if you treat Spain as fire and earth and air and all those things that are passionate, then Abstergo is the cold, clinical parallel. They're not prisoners, but they need to wear something that is comfortable, beautiful, simple.
The idea is to create a world that is calm and passive and very controlled, very deliberate, and it's sort of reinforcing the notion of when the Templars are in charge, there is no free will. The costumes and the things that they wear are really simple, very contemporary, sort of inspired by like period Japanese costumes, but elegant and spare.
They created a very fascinating world, and what is interesting is there's a complexity around us that really required, in a way, a simplicity in the costumes, which is very interesting and very beautiful.
in the world of Assassin's Creed, as opposed to the typical warrior of the time who would have a big sword, who would have shields. The assassins live by stealth.
We've had a lot of different types of weapons to have to deal with in terms of where they sit on the body, whether it be on the back, on the sides. In some ways, you should almost not notice some of those details because it should be so believable you're actually looking at the character rather than the bits and pieces.
Tim Wildgoose, who was the armourer, loved the game, and his energy and his passion in it got me excited.
Well, I was pretty excited because I knew that the design of weapons in Assassin's Creed has always been, like top notch. Some weapons are taken straight out of the games, some weapons we've designed entirely ourselves along with Justin, the director, and then also the background stuff is more historically accurate.
Do you recognise this? It's an assassin's blade.
There is definitely a crossover in the weapon world, mainly obviously the hidden blades. I've worked very closely with the armoury department so that we could integrate all the beautiful things they've made and make sure that stylistically our decoration and embellishment works in tandem with that.
Tim created, I think, about 7 to 8 authentic separate blades that then had their own kind of mechanism that at any time the actor could operate. So as much as possible we tried to incorporate that into the film and within the live action.
Here we've got a selection of the wrist blades that we've made for Assassin's Creed. This is Maria's wrist blade. We went for a double-pronged one with Maria just to make it a bit more interesting. It's more like a quick stabbing wrist blade. This is our Joseph Lynch wrist blade. Justin wanted a wrist blade that was very heavily 80s influenced, so we based the design on Taxi Driver and Rambo. So you have a Rambo-style blade with a Taxi Driver type mechanism slide to it. In the last sequence in our film, modern assassins need to sneak in a wrist blade into the Templar meeting. So we had to come up with a wrist blade that could be split into many different parts and be disguised as normal everyday objects to get through the security at Freemasons Hall. So we have a lot of fairly normal looking items here. So we've got a mobile phone cover, a pen, belt, the actual blade, a watch and a book.
It's like a museum. You don't need to go to the British Museum. You can just take a look in their armory workshop and see the stuff that they've created. So it's really authentic to the game, but it's also stunning and beautiful, and it all works. So when you see an assassin with a weapon like that, Creed fans are going to go, well, you guys really took the time in order to make that stuff special. Well, the exciting thing I think about Assassin's Creed is that we go back in time, just as when the Assassin's Creed game, it goes back to these periods in which they inhabit them completely. The attention to detail, the recreation of previous time periods, we really went out of our way in order to do the best possible job that we could to make you feel that you are alive in that world.
Something that's important to the story, and I think to the global reach of the audience, is the different places we go. We're trying to ground this in a way that's not a fantasy movie by going to real locations, going to different countries where the action and the story takes place, so we're not relying on visual effects to create the world. We're going to the real world to shoot the movie.
When we set out to make the movie, we knew that we needed some place in which we could recreate 15th century Spain.
Roll, please. 3, 2, 1, action!
We chose Malta after looking all over Europe. There are very few places in the world that still work for the 15th century, and Malta had vast areas that worked just as they were.
We started the shoot off in Malta, which was really hot. I just sort of have flashbacks of wearing that suit in the heat there, but fantastic. It's hot, sweaty.
Action!
I was just trying to keep up with her. We filmed around Valletta, the old town in Malta. So, you know, all the action sequences take part in that wonderful ancient town.
We shot in Valletta because we knew we were able to do a lot of these parkour sequences for real off buildings that reflected some of the architecture that would have been there in Seville in 15th century Spain.
Because Valletta is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, we had to get structural reports on all the buildings that we were on. All the buildings are extremely old, and especially up in the bell towers, trying to put all of the truss work in. Some of them are for stunt rigs and wire rigs, and some of them are for camera rigs. Each one has to be treated the same way, with care and respect, as we're in one of the oldest cities in the whole of Europe.
So we're running along the roofs where, you know, the jumps are happening, fights are happening on the rooftops there. That really was a great way to start the film because that's kind of where we wanted to go from. In an era where there's a lot of CGI in these kind of films, we wanted to have as much old school, real location shoots as possible.
You just try to shoot as much in camera as possible, and you do a lot of foreground elements for real and the actual action for real. And then that's when you start bringing in the world of 15th century Spain is in the backgrounds. We went to Seville and we did sort of scans of the buildings. You know, we sort of studied how the architecture had changed. So there's an enormous amount of effort that's gone in to create a lot of this stuff for as real as possible.
Everyone set! Let's roll cameras.
When we were trying to figure out what would be an interesting regression time period, the time period of the Spanish Inquisition always seemed really like a good juxtaposition to what we were doing in the sort of present day. To go back to the Spanish Inquisition was going to have lots of red colors and, you know, the idea of sacrifice, what was happening in the auto da fe. It was a very good contrast, just in a visual experience.
The Spanish Inquisition was one of the most crazy kind of times in history. I think there's a kind of very gothic feel about it all, but we definitely want to make those worlds feel very grounded and be inspired by shooting in some of the real locations that we choose. So it's really important that a lot of those locations feel very real to the audience and they feel as though they're actually going back to those particular periods of time.
So auto da fe. So this will be the kind of entrance to it. We'll have the King and Queen of Spain here.
You know, we couldn't really sort of shortchange the past. And so one of the most exciting things that we did in the movie historically is we recreated an auto da fe.
Have a raised platform where they burn Maria and Aguilar.
During the Spanish Inquisition, they would routinely take and burn people at the stake as a way of ridding themselves of what they perceived as heretics. So the kind of research that all of our departments had to go through, for the art department to build this amazing stadium in which this happens, I mean, it's terrifying because when you see it and when you see someone lighted on fire and you realize that that's the world that our characters, as these assassins, were living in, it just makes that experience so much more powerful.
With the auto da fe, you're just trying to get as much in camera as possible, get as many extras as we could and to be able to kind of build a lot of these sets and actually set them in environments where you could get an enormous amount of scale. That was the biggest sort of group of people that I'd ever worked with. There's something undeniable about the experience of leading that many people. It's unlike anything I've done before.
That is a wrap in Malta.
It's been really challenging here with the weather and everything and just the pace of it, but we've got some amazing stuff which I can't wait to show you, and I look forward to seeing you in London. So thank you so much.
Malta was a great starting point for us, and then we came back to the UK and we went to Pinewood and Langley for the studio stuff, which involved all of our Abstergo shoot.
That's where we built Abstergo, which is sort of the industrial, complex at which the Templars do their work. And Andy Nicholson, the production designer, built a fantastic set there.
With Abstergo, we wanted to build the sets. So, we spent a lot of time sort of building real walled sets and being able to have long journeys with the camera where you went from one section of Abstergo to the other and didn't cut. I'm very fortunate in that I have an extraordinary DOP, Adam Arkapour, who had enormous influence in how this film was shot. Adam brought an energy to all of that that definitely is up on the screen. But his visual point of view for how the audience experienced the regressions and how they experienced the present day in Abstergo was heavily inspired by his energy.
The Abstergo facilities is, in our film, this sort of celebration to science, if it were. There's a lot of greys in the idea of Abstergo being a very benign environment, you know, this idea of benign control, how they operate. So it kind of reflects itself in the building that they occupy.
In Abstergo, there was always a mix of future and past, and I think they did an amazing job mixing the two periods.
We have this very kind of futuristic world that, again, we're more leaning on a kind of eyes wide shut sort of Stanley Kubrick world where these places feel less sci-fi but feel kind of as if they were lived in, and every button feels as though it has a purpose rather than it feeling all kind of quite magical.
Just to see the set, see the scale of everything, it's mind-blowing. You know, when you walk on there and you see the interior of Abstergo, you feel like you're in the game, you feel like you want to reach out and touch it.
It's really emotional to see all of a sudden the universe we're creating for more than 10 years now. But now we are in. It's something really special. It's tangible. All of a sudden it's real. We've been claiming that AC was real, that the world of AC was real for years, and now it is for real. This is what I say Assassin's Creed is about.
There's such a distinct look to the Assassin's Creed games, which is so extraordinary and so beautiful, and I think that there's definitely an embracing of the kind of natural DNA of the look of Assassin's Creed. You kind of believe in the worlds and you believe how the characters walk in them, and we're using real light and we're using real locations, and we're just really trying to kind of bring a reality to what is a really dynamic and highly kind of designed game so that an audience can believe in it, and also for it to be a different experience to the game, something that feels a little bit more human and organic, and a world that you can kind of believe in. I do try to make the films feel very visceral and feel like you're kind of breathing with them a little. I kind of wanted those action sequences in this to feel like you were close to the assassins and that you were kind of really in their footsteps as they were sort of engaged and attempting these kind of extraordinary physical feats. So that it just didn't feel like you're an observer and watching it from afar, but that you actually sort of felt the pulse and the spirit of them.
As far as action goes, we have a little bit of everything. We have action that takes place in present day, and we have action that takes place in the past.
The action sequences are heavily based on the ideas of flight, which are connected to the assassins. So we wanted to kind of put cameras on, wires and travel them across the stunt guys and really get that sense of flight, use lots of drones, use lots of helicopters, really try to physically do that so that it all felt very visceral and grounded.
3, 2, 1, action!
A lot of our inspiration came from real parkour artists. One of the first ones was Damien Walters, and some of his YouTube clips were just extraordinary in terms of physically what he could pull off. So straight away we got Damien, and he became a spirit and an energy of like how you pull this stuff off for real.
When the game first came out, I thought it was the best thing I've ever seen. It's just a very nice opportunity to, be given that shot to perform your skills on a game that you're a big fan of. It's not many people get to do that. We're going to do the leap off the top of the church, and hopefully we sort of turn in towards camera and throw in a dagger straight towards camera. everyone else seems happy, so they're happy, I'm happy, eh?
It's a big action movie. And you know, we do a lot of rehearsal time. We're constantly working and coming up with stuff and shooting and prepping and shooting and prepping. The stunt team is trying to see in camera people doing physical performances that are second to none. I've got some of the best parkour exponents the world has to offer.
Yeah! We are trying to put the slacklining our sport in the scene, figuring out how to use the slacklining in a creative way and how we can use it in different ways.
The idea is to get from one rooftop to another. So we need to use slacklines to make some creative moves and get some cool transfers and really cool flips. This is never done before, for sure.
Stand by and roll camera.
We're filming the first action of slackline for Assassin's Creed, and it's getting there, slowly, but it's getting there.
We're just trying to get the stunt done, and it's probably the most difficult one out of the whole shoot. It's a combination of timing. Jan, of course, with the sliding, he's amazing, he's getting that done. I mean, I'm confident he's going to pull it off.
Let's do it!
Action!
We already have some really good shots for the deleted scenes, which is perfect, and now we keep on trying to get the perfect shot for the movie.
You okay, Tommy?
I'm still alive, and it's a long way to go. They're making readjustments right now, so it's gonna be a little bit easier for me. It's gonna work today.
Action! And forward there, guys, please. Well done, Sally. Sally, everybody.
Yeah, I did it! Woo! Oh, feels great. That's how you do it.
And drum!
What's interesting about The Assassins is that I wanted to feel like we had a cast of Olympians rather than superheroes. You know, it was always just on that edge of what is humanly possible.
There's definitely key moments that you want to try and capture that really throw back to the fans. They want to see a big leap of faith, and so that stuff's really important.
The leap of faith lends itself very cinematically. It's a very epic sort of moment in the character's journey.
Today's our final day in Spain, and Damien Walters, who is the best parkour guy in the world, he's going to go off 120 feet. It's a signature moment, so we're going to do it for real.
We start off low. The first jump is just a matter of figuring out the timing of the free fall to hold just the one position and keep that very iconic pose the entire way down without having to tuck or having to adjust yourself is quite a tricky thing to do, so we'll see how that goes.
Okay, here we go.
Just going to do the first jump, 70 feet.
3, 2, 1, go.
It doesn't look high when you're on the floor. When you're up there, you look down and the bag is only 10 metres by 10 metres, so it looks about the size of A4 piece of paper. Go up again.
3, 2, 1, go.
We've only got to 90 feet up to yet. I'm hitting the bag a bit top heavy, so getting a bit of whiplash on the back of the head. So I've got to try and not do that. 120 now, so unknown territory for this bag and for this move. Yeah, feel good. I think we're done for today. That's the best bit, when you walk off and go, oh, I'm all right, yeah.
It was the thing that he'd been working up to, and he did it. That's an incredible thing. We're really proud that we got a 120-foot leap of faith for real in the film.
is a wrap on the main unit of Assassin's Creed, everybody.
It's been a long old journey, but yeah, it's great. It's nice that it's all finally coming to an end, and I think we've got some really good stuff. So we started out trying to think of all these stunts for real, and trying to think of, you know, how we can make the biggest impact in the jumps and the falls and the fights and stuff, and I think we kind of stuck to that all the way through. I feel like we've achieved exactly what we sort of set out to do.
The stunt guys are incredible in this. It's just incredible team, and what they sort of put at risk, you know, every single day, just out of the love of doing it. When you're sort of sitting there and you're seeing people risk their lives and doing the most extraordinary and possible physical feat for your film, there's something extremely moving about that. It's something I'm really proud of.
I understand it's your birthday. Party's just getting started.
What do you think were the first initial moments or sounds or ideas that you sort of started to cling to in regards to Assassin's Creed?
I mean, even the big orchestral stuff started having a groove to it.
Yeah.
And once I started hearing that, my feeling was that when those assassins had finished their days, you know, stabbing people and doing all the things that they do, and they all kind of went back and
hung out.
I always wanted to kind of imagine what that sounded like. What did it sound like when they... Because to me, they're all very charismatic.
You were definitely interested in a swagger. You actually came into the whole thing with a whole lot of tracks, which was kind of like the swagger and the rhythm of the Assassins, didn't you?
Right from the outset, I felt like percussion was going to play a big part in it. So the first thing we did was we went into a studio I was still in Australia at that point, went to a studio in Sydney, and all I asked Seth to do was bring in every tom and kick drum that he had, and we basically just put them around the room, not even on stands or anything. We just mic'd the entire room and wandered around and just hit things for 2 days. If it sounded good, we'd kind of roll on with that, and then of course Chris brought in a couple of old 80s synths that were pretty unique, and there were a couple of sounds on there that were really cool, percussively, and that became the basis of it. A few of those things remained in the score, but instinctively from the start it was on the right track.
What were your apprehensions about doing action sequences?
Hitting beats without it being cheesy, getting a sense of rhythm and doing it so it still felt dynamic and it was entertaining, but it wasn't just the usual kind of stuff. Polanski, I heard, just he never uses music. He doesn't edit to music. So, and I love that idea that you go, this is the edit and it works without anything. So that whatever is added to it is the other layer. The joy of it is to go in and add that kind of layer that's not there, that doesn't exist, and a kind of abstract kind of layer that is doing something to the film that is almost something you can't explain.
The other thing too was like how to have breaks of silence. There was one particular moment in the carriage roll of kind of like, where could you find moments where the sound suddenly stopped and you just had a music element, or just creating kind of space within the build-ups. That was the other thing too, we had a lot of helicopter shots and perspectives almost from the eagle. So when you went in close to the Who's and you were kind of there and experiencing it, and how the music was kind of really pulsing and driving that, to then suddenly going out to those big wides and landscape and kind of getting perspective and distance from it. I really wanted something shocking in the way that the sound kind of worked.
I think it was like how to get this momentum, how to get a little bit of the sense of place without going to kind of cliche sort of thing where we get into the Inquisition and it's overtly Spanish or there's a Middle Eastern kind of thing. I think it was more getting that kind of momentum. And I was always kind of interested in obviously doing that with an orchestra.
also the most subjective element of the whole filmmaking process. You know, everyone thinks they have a taste on music, and music is just that sort of thing that it's naked most of the time, isn't it?
Yeah, and also too, going through the process of it developing is that sometimes you send things in that are like half cooked.
He'll send me a loop for 5 minutes that just repeats the same bass beat, then I'll put it in, and I can tell everyone's looking at it just going, is this thing going to change or whatever? And I'm sitting there hearing what it's going to be in 3 months' time.
The films, they do go off into the world like naughty children. 2 years later, when you're watching them and you kind of, you get this sort of sense of pride in the film because it's gone off and done its own thing and it's existing in its own world. So it can be a really kind of wild experience, but it always needs a bit of time before you can actually watch it in that way.
When we're actually kind of doing it, we've got this very lovely artist kind of relationship. We both deeply kind of are intrigued and respect each other's opinions and also have that fantastic thing of being able to tell each other to fuck off. The way I am with Jed and the way he is with me, if we tried that on outside that relationship, I mean, people would report us.
What do you want from me? Your past.
Did you anticipate the challenges that we were going to face, I guess, when we sort of started editing what is a very, very complex story?
Yes and no. You know, not maybe to the extent, but I think I felt early on there needed to be a real correct percentage of past and present, and I think there was too much present. And I think in paring away a lot of the present, it brought the past more forward.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of a strength of the movie. Also, streamlining story and character and finding those beautiful arcs within the film and within the characters to bring Cal and Sophia to their right and proper place.
I'm intrigued to talk to you about, like, when we first sat down and looked at the assembly. I think it's safe to say that there was a discussion that we had about, oh my God, there is just too much. There's too many ideas, there's too many concepts, there's too many characters. How do we strip this down to its main kind of focus?
And find its greatest strength. And in finding its greatest strength was stripping away and figuring out, well, this is a place we need this is a place we need this, and this is a place we need this. Yeah. And that was like just right. Fairly early on, we moved it back and forth, but it ended up at the beginning, the initiation scene, to just set up this place and time, so it kind of anchors it. When it was started in the contemporary time with the boy, it was an interesting opening, but it didn't anchor you somehow.
Yeah.
And you kind of needed that tone of the past to then go into the present and start picking up the feeling of it. It gives it more mystery and beauty, and I think it'll probably be something that people that don't know the game or do know the game will be more satisfied by.
Yeah. And what was your approach with the action?
Cutting the action to just make it as, as exciting as it could be, to keep it really on the move. Things like the second regression was very challenging to keep the sense of geography was important, and the carriage chase was just very visceral and very fun, and you guys shot it to death, which was great, with all those wonderful aerial shots and close-ups, so it's very dynamic. And then the fight with Ojeda is very, very beautiful too, because it has a whole different feel to it, and because it's almost like a match, and it has this kind of operatic kind of feel to it, and it folded in with Maria's death and the moment they have before she spurs him on to kill him. It's very elegant. The beauty of the three regressions is all three are very different, and they had different challenges, and there were wonderful ways to make them different.
I guess the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was the tone of the film. I think that the film is tonally darker than probably the script is.
It wasn't a superhero wisecracky film. It was something different, and the presence of Marion, the presence of Jeremy, beside the presence of Michael, there's a gravity to the story. Then you have the physical reality of a completely believable auto da fe and these really like strong scenes of violence. It's dark by nature, but then there's other aspects too of like edges of it, especially with Cal, are not that dark. There's something very moving and beautiful about when his mother comes to him, and when all the assassins gather and kind of almost give him the strength to take this on. There's something very poignant.
You're not alone, Cal.
It's been interesting making a film of this sort of scale in this sort of genre, and I think also trying to somehow simplify it down to its core.
It could have gone many different ways, but I think we went the right way.
We work in the darkness to serve the light.
We are assassins.
It's a very ambitious film in regards to concept.
Yeah.
You know, you've kind of got this present day world of the animus and what that is, and you know, in regards to the arm and the concept of how you see memory and how that plays out in the space. And that was an evolving process, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's interesting to start, I guess, at the beginning. One of the challenging things about visual effects is that they are a very time-consuming process to get something that actually is an interesting and engaging image. A lot of the time what we look at early and what we're able to generate quickly just doesn't look very good. And that's sort of almost the opposite of what art department's able to do. And they're able to generate images that are inspiring and engaging and that you can engage with creatively quite quickly, which is great. And then we have to take that and try and turn that into something that is the final movie. And so for me, it was interesting coming into that process that already had a lot of energy behind it and trying to figure out what were the components that we could continue to build upon and which things weren't necessarily in line with where I ended up feeling you wanted to go.
Let's talk about then the regressions in terms of bringing to life, I think, a lot of the physicality of the film and the period look of the film for it to be as grounded as possible in a kind of reality. So
yeah, and there was a desire to go to Malta and shoot on location, to do the stunts for real. I really believe in that consistent idea. I think that the best approach and the best way to utilize visual effects is for the thing that you're looking at to be real and the thing that you're connecting emotionally with to be real, and then for us to be working around that.
It was almost like I had this allergic reaction to anything that felt too perfect and painted.
Yeah, like real human decisions rather than something that's too art directed. And I think a good example of that is the buttress run sequence, which is based upon a street in Malta. And we tried a few different solutions to that, but definitely the best way to do it was to base it very much on that real place and just change bits and pieces. Ultimately, it's a fully digital little section, a few shots, because we weren't able to do those kinds of stunts and the buttress didn't exist and we had to take that approach. But because we were based in a real world, this particular person had plastered their wall at probably a colour that the other person didn't like, and all of those things again add up to something that feels and looks real.
I think it is easier to kind of create a heightened world where you can take shortcuts on, because that just becomes the style of the film.
Yeah, there's a certain like visual benchmark that you set, and then everything just has to click in.
And it's surprising how much an audience, I think, will kind of buy into it. Because you're kind of going, well, this is our world and this is what it is. When I think you suddenly err onto using real locations, real light and so forth, you're actually making a contract to the audience, which is, look, go a little further in believing that this kind of existed and is.
And as soon as it comes down from there, you're very aware of it as an audience. Where if it's consistent throughout, or if that, whatever that stylized look is, I think the consistency is the key.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's the challenge.
When Michael experiences and feels a memory very strongly, that has a clarity. So it's kind of like been this constant thing of, well, here is a character from the past that's projected that, so let's call it Black Knight or Hader, that Michael's fighting. So you don't want a Hader to look real in the room because he's a projection. Yeah. You've got to feel as though he's being projected by this light. It's been a challenge, hasn't it?
It's been one of the hardest things we've done. Yeah, it's been very, very tricky, but quite rewarding as well. And what I think we've found interesting is the margin for when things don't work to when they do is really, really fine.
Yeah.
Whereas in most of the time you actually get pretty close and you're there. Yeah. Whereas with this, it often doesn't look right until this tiny little kind of 1% happens.
I'm so proud of the visual effects in this film and just the incredible passion and effort that you've done, Ged and Dean Egg and the Sydney site and the whole team. Thank you for putting up with me.
What you're about to see, hear, and feel are the memories of someone who's been dead for 500 years.
Can you take me back to those initial conversations of adapting Assassin's Creed as a video game and what sort of freedom you got?
Totally.
And how that sort of formed into the approach to the draft?
Back then it was a lot less focused in a way. I mean, we focused it in on the Spanish Inquisition and on Spain itself.
Yeah.
And we've, tightened the story on this one artifact. And I think back then it was a lot more sprawling because there were people who felt that different elements of the game should be in it. It was just like distilling it down to something mythical and pure, rather than trying to get in as much as possible and encompass as much history and as much rich theme. It was just about what is it to be an assassin, what is it to become an assassin, and what is it to be part of this tribe.
There are so many ideas in this. Has that been the biggest challenge?
It's been one of the biggest challenges, and I think the other biggest challenge was to find a protagonist who begins in the place that we'd decided from the very first treatment, let alone the first draft, would begin on death row, and would begin a killer, a sort of almost irredeemable killer, which Michael was very influential in. And it was always very tough to find that character and find what he really wanted deep down. And I mean, ultimately it proves simple. It's like, this is a character who wants to belong to something bigger than himself and wants a cause that will channel the violence of centuries that has gone into him into something productive.
When I came on board, Sophia, I think, was Gary.
That was Michael's idea, actually, making Joseph a woman. Great.
Which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And really interesting, and I think kind of adds a very interesting
so much better
element to the film. What do you think that did?
Infusing Marion with as much power and making her absolutely Michael's equal in Toto, I think that draws a side out of Michael that kind of puts him off his guard, and it draws the audience in as well to the legitimacy of the beliefs of what the Templars or Abstergoers are doing. When we made it a female character and thought of Marion, suddenly became someone who was much more zealous and earnest in her beliefs, and so was acting in these questionable ways but out of compassion, and that's really interesting.
I'm sorry, Carl, this is not the way I like to do things.
And don't do it.
I've always seen them as a sort of slight Romeo and Juliet sort of story, in that they both of them have been kind of tied to their kind of families, and it's a relationship that is never going to be allowed to work. And you definitely sort of, I think, feel that at the end, there's this destiny that they have to embrace.
I love the idea that were it not for history, they would connect as individuals. And I think that is there. If you took out the actual realization of their romance, the possibility of it is so much more potent. I think the idea that they're star-crossed lovers, but they're also kind of doomed to fight each other or face each other in the future is great.
I think we were very interested in the evolution of Cal accepting who he is and becoming a leader at the end. So there's an energy and a spirit to that, and then also the transformation of Sophia, sort of embracing, I guess, the destiny that's been marked out for her.
I totally agree, and I think that with so many themes going on and so many kind of laws to bear in mind, and when we're starting from that point with the character, to keep the film simple and adrenal, you really do just want to take this guy from this place on death row to becoming an assassin, because it's such a huge journey in itself. So I think the first film sort of has to chart that, which, as you say, just leaves so much potential afterwards.
The amount of investment that Mike has put into Assassin's Creed, and then for him to have the ability at his age to be, you know, very mature in the way he's able to kind of navigate, you know, the other influences that have come into the film in regards to the other writers and ideas and stuff, you know, I think is a you know, real credit to you.
Thanks, man.
Jump!
I think there is within this world an amazing story, like an amazing world, and it's everything you're saying, like the influence of our past on ourselves and what it means to suddenly belong to a code that means more than your own life. I think that's great.